After spending a ridiculous amount of time learning how to play Black and White 2, because the game doesn't exactly tell you any nuances to playing it successfully, I was finally able to complete it and was left wanting more. Good job there's an expansion then. I'm guessing this holds up about the same as the main game today in 2022, but let's have a look, shall we? In this video, I'll go through my experience of each of the islands and give my usual ramblings both on my personal success and whether the game is worth the play or not. The initial selling point of this expansion, for me, aside from more content, was that I could have a tiger. Naturally, I chose this as a follow-up to using the lion throughout the main campaign. You do, however, have the option to choose your beast from the main game, but sod that, the tiger looks cool. So going into this, I needed no tutorial and went into the first island feeling confident. Unlike the main game, this expansion pits players against a rival god who has an undead army and exceptional aim with destructive miracles, the same of which can't be said for myself. The game starts out on the first land, which the player has no control over, with Aztec survivors worshipping at a temple for their dead. Suddenly, a flash of purple light appears and crashes into the temple, bearing the god of the undead, and raises the dead Aztecs as ghost and skeleton soldiers. Thus ends the first land, and we move straight onto the Japanese land from the first game. I felt like I was a bit cheated here. Why show me the land if I can't even do anything with it? So I finally get to have a crack at this game with the Japanese land, and it was at this point that I realised that my confidence was truly misplaced. I began building up my settlement as usual, with the other god monologuing away in the background. Cut to a few minutes later and the undead army is crashing against the walls of my settlement as I tried in vain to throw rocks at them. Within minutes the settlement was overrun and they had destroyed my altar, rendering it impossible for me to use miracles. They also killed my tiger, so it was just me and some big rocks and my terrible aim against an undead army. Eventually I fought them off, but not after they destroyed literally everything. Hanging my head in shame, figuratively, I decided to start again. And also because I forgot to hit the record button. My second attempt was somewhat better and my settlement remained largely intact this time. But there was another element that I failed at for the second time, which was the men from the village that you need to rescue. You're supposed to send your creature to rescue them, but as soon as my cute fluffy tiger got anywhere near them, he was slain by the undead army. I decided I would manage without the men and breed myself a new army instead. Eventually, the opposing god unleashed their secret weapon, its own undead creature in the form of an ape. Intimidating as this thing looked, it proved to be exceptionally weak and was taken out repeatedly by both my archers and my tiger. Eventually, my sprawling metropolis took over the whole land, although this did take a ridiculous amount of time. There were a couple of puzzles to solve, but they didn't exactly feel well thought out, and it didn't really help me get to know the citizens of the island. As with the main game, you don't really feel connected to any of these people, which goes some way to explaining why I don't really care for the bunch of whingers constantly going on about needing food or to breed. The third land is the Norse. The Aztec god had captured and enslaved the Norse and made their creature do his bidding by taking sacrifices to an altar. I started the land with a limited number of people and 3 separate gates. Again, I went with my usual tactic of building and breeding as fast as possible. Northeast of the town is a children's puzzle with Roman numerals on it. Once complete, a cutscene of the enemy creature will be shown being temporarily stunned and stopping what it is doing. It is helpful if the creature is trying to attack, but it will not give out any tribute. I decided this puzzle was more hassle than it was worth and focused on building up my sprawling settlement instead. I spent most of my hard-earned tribute on a hospital, which was one of the new buildings in this expansion, along with an amphitheatre. I learned from the main game that this increases a settlement's impressiveness extremely quickly and makes for a happy populace, so I felt it was a surefire way to speedrun this island. Unfortunately, I soon noticed a challenge though, because there seemed to be a dire shortage of ore, which actually impacted my ability to build an army. It was only when a migration came with 40k of it towards the end of the island was I able to ramp things up a bit. Until that point, I mostly focused on building as many structures as possible, whilst hurling lightning miracles at the undead army. So I ended up with a huge sprawling settlement of mostly wooden structures. I definitely think there should have been a better approach to this, as the island actually started to veer into the territory of being both boring and frustrating. When the enemy creature has sacrificed about 10 villagers, 2 platoons of skeletons and a catapult will appear. The player must defend their gates by destroying the catapult. I opted for building some extra altars to produce more mana and throwing lightning miracles at them. As the land progresses, the player can capture or impress the other towns to weaken the power of the Aztec god, much like the main game. However, the more of his towns are taken, the more platoons and catapults he will send. Once all the smaller towns have been taken, the Aztec god becomes powerless and can be conquered. After conquering the land, the Aztec god will mock the player and say that the first 2 lands are just distractions and the real goal is the Greek homeland. I did manage to complete this land eventually though, and made it to the final island, which was an extremely stressful experience to play initially. The opposing god likes to use a hurricane wonder as often as possible, and despite putting a shield miracle up each time, it still destroyed a good chunk of my settlement. I found an effective solution to this was to send the tiger over to the wonder and just keep destroying it. I then put my focus on taking his settlement, further rendering that miracle useless. I also noticed that when the hand of the opposing god was hovering over my settlement whilst monologuing, it meant that he was about to start hurling miracles at that area. I did try to return the favour, but I could never seem to reach. I thought I was safe from these destructive wonders once I destroyed the hurricane one, but I was wrong. There is another wonder at the island's capital, this time an earthquake wonder, and unfortunately my tiger was getting nowhere near it. Unlike the main game though, this expansion seems to give you significantly more tribute for bonus objectives and completing the land. So for the first time ever in this game, I was able to afford a wonder of my own, and opted for the hurricane as well. The expansion also gives you a number of new miracles: lava, life, death and verdant. Seeing as I tend to go for nice playthroughs, I prioritised life and verdant, which were very effective against the undead army. Overall, playing this particular island was constantly cycling between putting up shield miracles, defending against the army at my borders, and trying to build up my settlement and army. Stressful indeed, and required far more concentration than the main game seemed to. I was able to use my Hurricane Wonder only a couple of times because it took so long to charge, and when it did, the cutscene was broken and it seemed to be generating a hurricane in the water surrounding the island. Due to my overuse of mana, I limped over the finish line with only 55 people left alive, but I still did it. You then have the option to replay all the islands with all the tribute you already have and your creature in his current state, which does make the game significantly easier. This time I was able to use my tiger to rescue the men on the first island and had no issues at all fighting off the undead army. So is it worth playing? If you enjoyed the main game, I'd be inclined to say yes, but it doesn't really offer you much extra apart from some new buildings like the hospital and blacksmith. Personally, I would rather have seen some different islands from the one in the main game, but at a different angle. I understand what they were going for with the plot, but it also felt a bit lazy as the assets were already there. I did enjoy being pitted against another god, but it did also feel frustrating and unfair that he was able to throw miracles at my settlement, but I wasn't able to do the same to him. Overall though, I had a fun time, and I'm blaming this addictive game for my long break in between videos.